All right, everyone, we will go ahead and get started to respect everyone's time. Welcome to our third annual ONTPD and TECaN virtual job search series. For a reminder, today's session will be recorded and will be sent out to everyone who registered for this session. So if you have to hop off, no worries, we will send you the link whenever it becomes available. Please continue to advertise this session to your co-fellows or anyone you think that would benefit from this series. Have them go and register just like you have in order to receive the Zoom links for the upcoming sessions. Additionally, thank you to everyone who submitted questions. We will try to get through as many questions as we can today through the didactic and the Q&A portion of this talk. Any questions that were submitted or submitted via the chat, if we are unable to get to them, we will work on getting typed answers by our panelists today to those questions and submit those or email those out to everyone who completes the post-session evaluation survey. Speaking of, we love putting on this series and can only continue to put on this series and continue to improve it through the help of all of you. So please give us feedback. You will see a QR code in the bottom right-hand screen throughout the presentation today. In case you have to hop off early, please take a snapshot of that QR code and fill out the survey. Any resources that we develop through this didactic, including the Zoom chat text, we will send out to anyone who completes that post-evaluation or post-session evaluation. And then as a reminder, Zoom links for the upcoming sessions will be sent out the week of those sessions. Thank you for joining us today. Next slide. So today we will have kind of a three-tiered approach to the job search overview. Next slide. Myself and my co-fellow and co-TECaN member, Bree Liberio, are moderating this session. We will be looking through the chat, and so feel free to submit any questions, and we will kind of collate those. And if the panelists do not get them to in the chat, we will ask them at the end or have written answers for them. This is a slide showing all the upcoming series. So today you are a part of the job search overview. Next slide. So as for this talk, again, it is three-tiered. We will start with understanding the roadmap and timeline of the interview season by Dr. Myers, followed by preparing your CV and marketing yourself by Dr. French. I will then kind of share with you guys some of the survey data we collected last year on the details of individual job searches from fellows who underwent the job search last year to kind of help give you a general idea of what this process is going to look like. And then we will end with a Q&A section. Next slide.
So welcome, everybody. I am Patrick Myers. I'm a program director at Northwestern at Lurie. I'm also the chair of ONTPD. And just kind of in terms of background for my job search, I spent the first 4 years of my post-fellowship career in private practice, had 2 different jobs, which I really liked a lot and were very different, and then moved into academic medicine. So I did a fair amount of job hunting early. So I think that the first thing to do is think a little bit about finding the correct roadmap, right? One of my fellows, I think, said something really wise to me when I talked to her kind of about analyzing how her job search went. And what she said is, Patrick, you got to know what you want in your heart of hearts. It will make job hunting easier. And she'd had a really complicated, like, academic versus private practice versus like really needing to be near family who were sick. And she said that, like, once I kind of figured out what actually what I needed the most in my life, then it became a lot less stressful and a lot less hard to do. And so just think about what your actual priorities are, right? You know, is it family? For me, I stayed in Chicago and I took some private practice jobs, even though I wanted to be academic, because family is my priority, right? And I needed to be near my wife and kids. Location, Is it a research mentor, research goals? Is it acuity, either a lot of acuity or a different type of acuity, like you much prefer to be in a delivery hospital, or you really prefer to be in a large level 4? Is it money? Is it familiarity? There's a lot to be said about staying where you trained, right? That transition is often easier, even though there are some challenges about doing that. Colleagues, collegiality, growth opportunities, mentors, and work environment are just a smidgen of what may drive you, but I think it's really important before you do the hard work of finding a job is actually spend half an hour, talk to people you trust and like about what your vision is, because I think it will make everything else easier. So I'm going to spend a fair amount of time talking on timeline because it's going to be hard or different than what you're used to. And this by far will cause you the most stress and anxiety because it's something that you've never done before, haven't done since you got that job as a high school lifeguard, right? What you're used to is, you have what you're used to for the last decade or so is having very definitive dates. The application's due, the program opens the files, I get the interviews, there's a rank list due, there's a definitive match day. And that is a paradigm that no longer exists in your life, right? And these little green dots are the dots of when my fellows or people I know recently got jobs. And as you can see, they are all over the place. They aren't that nice little tidy like due dates, including somebody who got a job 2 weeks before the next academic year started, and they found a wonderful job. They're actually phenomenally successful. I'm going to try to be, despite the fact that there's a lot of heterogeneity, I'm going to try to give you a very big ballpark of where the timeline is. And I think the caveat to that is that timelines vary a lot by the location, East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, by the year, by the actual program, as people either private or academically know their budgets differently every year, and by each fellow. Like your timeline will be different than most. But so take this as kind of a starting point. So my general sense is kind of in June or right about now, start writing your cover letter and CV. Heather's going to talk about this a lot more in detail, but this is the time to kind of like get that on paper and start thinking about getting these prepared. At the same time, identify programs that you're going to be interested in. Take that list of what you want in your heart of hearts and make a list of 5 to 15 programs that might meet those needs, and talk to people about those programs. And so you're new to the job search, and so you may not be able to find a definitive list. Your program director should help. A group of people that actually can help you a ton are the last 2 or 3 years fellows that graduated, the alumni that and were in the program with. They have no skin in the game at this point. They have a job, but they also have a lot of contacts and lists that will help you make this identified program. So chat with them. I would say in July, starting in about July, email potential jobs, right? This should be a very brief 2 to 3 sentence email, because the people you're emailing sometimes can get 150, 200 emails a day if they're having a particularly rough day as a head of a large academic center or private practice. So it should be 2 to 3 sentences saying, I'm looking for a job. This is who I am. I'd like to start this time. Here's my attached CV and cover letter. This is probably the point which is hardest. Some people will say start earlier, some people will start later. And part of the problem is that each person hiring has a different preferences. I've heard some section chiefs say, like, I don't know what to do with the CVs I get in July through August because I'm not ready to hire. I don't have a budget. It's irritating to me. But then there's other section chiefs that say, well, the earlier the better. So my general sense is July through August is probably a good time to make those, send that initial batch of 5 to 15 job inquiries out. It's okay, and it's expected for you to send follow-up emails. I recommend somewhere between 6 to 8 weeks after that first blast if you haven't heard anything from. anybody. And again, it should be just a really short email saying, I'm still interested in the job. I'm still looking. Please let me know if you need me to resend my CV and cover letter. And then finally, if you still are looking in January after the holidays, send another short email just to inquire. One of my 3 jobs that I've gotten was based on a follow-up email I sent in kind of mid-January. And be a little mindful about when you send your emails. If you send it on Friday night, it's going to get buried and nobody will look at it for a while. If you send it in the middle of Thanksgiving or in the middle of like December 24th through January 1st, nobody's going to look at it. And so just think a little bit about probably a Tuesday, Wednesday is perfect. 5 to 10 days after the holiday is perfect. And little things like that actually can help you a lot. Interviews very roughly happen from August to February. But again, look at these green dots and realize that there's variety, right? It may start a little bit earlier, start a little later. The first interview may be hybrid, it may be in person. They're trying to get to know you. They're trying to see like, do the things you bring to the program and do the things that the program offer. Do those 2 things are in alignment? Somewhere between 4 to 12 weeks after that first interview, you're going to get an opportunity often to have a second interview. At this point, they're much more serious about you. They are likely interested in offering you a job at this point. If you are in an academic place, they will often ask you to do a job talk, which is a presentation of the research you're doing and your vision of where you want to go over the next couple of years. I would say that if you are asked to give a job talk, you absolutely need your research mentor to practice this with you. And for my fellows, I ask that they practice it with their mentor a couple times, and then I try to get somewhere between 3 to 5 faculty to hear it from Northwestern, and then we ask the hard questions so that by the time you're actually giving your actual real job talk, the hard stuff has been done and you've rehearsed it a bunch of times. The next part is kind of somewhere between November and March, you'll get an offer letter. The offer letter just basically says, we're going to offer you a job. It is not legally binding. During COVID, right as the pandemic hit, unfortunately, several fellows had their offer letters rescinded. But that is unbelievably rare because most of the people hiring you actually are trying to hire in good faith. And it can be very vague and it can be very detailed. I've had offer letters that basically say, welcome, we'd like to offer you a job starting this date. Your responsibilities will be whatever the section chief wants them to be. And I've also had offer letters that say, we will pay you X amount of dollars, you will do 72 calls, you will do this many weekends, you will work in this unit, this amount of weeks you will work in this unit, this other unit. So there's a lot of variety, but essentially this is, you've been offered a job. And then the contract, which is somewhere between 20 and 80 pages of fine print, will arrive quite late, sometimes during your orientation. As soon as you've got that offer letter and you accept that offer letter, start working on your credentialing and state licensing. It is hard to do, it's tedious, you've got to get a lot of signatures, and that credentialing and state licensing, if you don't get it done, you run the risk of not being able to start on time. So this little red box is a little bit, I would say, very generally when offer letters for private practice happen. They happen a lot earlier. The season's a little bit earlier. And I would say this is very roughly where the academic calendar is, which is, somewhere between 4 to 8 weeks later than the private practice job. And Nicole is going to talk a little bit more about this, and she actually has some data from last year's job search series. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the kind of the nitty gritty of this, which is, one of the things is, where do you start when you're looking for your job search? Like I would say, really use every single last connection you have. There are some fellows that their natural inclination is that they want to be fairly quiet or private about this. It doesn't help you. Talk to everybody you know. You have a bigger social network than you think. And the reality is your community actually really wants you to succeed. So ask your program director, ask your section director, ask alumni, research mentor, faculties, APN. Like some of the best leads are like, oh, my sister's an APN in UAB and I know they're hiring this year, right? And you're like, oh, great, I had no idea. So be vocal about what you're looking for, and ask people. People want you to succeed and will help you. Heather's going to talk about this. I would just say it needs to be perfect. You need lots of people to look at this and think about it. So how do you initiate contacts with programs? After you've made your list, send a very short email and attach your CV and personal statement that many people have looked at. Ask people to advocate for you. If you have sent a letter, if you've sent an email to a section head or a private practice group, and you know somebody came from that program. So like I went to the U of C network as a resident and fellow. If my fellows are applying to U of C, I will try to like let the people at U of C know that my fellow is both excellent, amazing, and they should hire them. So like think about using the people you know in different programs to advocate for you. We're generally willing to do that. And it's important. Send reminders, and then also just keep notes, lots and lots of notes. After a while, programs get really confusing. For example, my initial job search, I have not one, not two, but three different potential employees that were named Tom. And two of the three of them would call me at 7 or 8 at night after they'd done with service in their emails and say, Patrick, so one I was talking about, this is Tom. And I was like, I don't know which Tom. Who are you? And so the notes are helpful. Your first interview, just before you even get to your first interview, talk to your program director or associate program director. Like, how do you handle time off? Like, you know, it doesn't do you any good to get an interview where you then are in the middle of service or you're like post call or something like that. So talk to your program director probably now about how your program handles time off in interviews, and are there times that are better or worse. Most programs will send out a list of people that want to interview you. I would say really, really, really research the people who are going to interview, what undergrads they went to, med school, papers. And what you're really trying to do is find areas of commonality, right? Like they're not really interviewing you. They're interviewing you for a job that could potentially be for the rest of their career. And as a result, like they're looking for people that they want to work with. And so if you went to the University of Waterloo and they went to the University of Waterloo, that is a great thing to talk about. I would generate a list of questions for each person that you want to that you're going to interview you. It's unfair, but it's true that if the interview kind of like peters out because you run out of things to talk about, almost always the interviewee is the one that gets blamed. So keep talking, market yourself. It's going to be a long day, but hang in there. And again, take lots of notes. The second interview, the program's really serious about you. And the question you need to really ask yourself is, what can they offer you? What can you offer them? And I think that that's really the thing that you need to focus on in those interviews. I would recommend highly that you ask. Sometimes they will ask, who do you want to interview you? Who do you want to talk to? I would say talk to junior faculty because they will tell you about the culture, how junior faculty are treated, which means how likely you'll be treated, potential research mentors, potential site leaders if you're working in private practice. And we talked a little bit about the job talk. So offer letters, what the job expects from you. They can, like I said, they can be very detailed or they can be very general. But the important thing is that you are on the clock at this point, meaning that often you will have 30 days to accept or reject that offer letter. And what's challenging about that is you may have an interview after those 30 days. And I think it's not appropriate to say like, could you extend your offer letter? I have an interview on December 2nd that I've already committed to take. Would you mind if I did that first? But they can also be really short. I had a fellow who had 48 hours to accept or reject because she was taking a job that had many applicants, that was highly desirable in a highly desirable city. And when she asked for an extension, they said no. So 4 to 6 weeks is typical. 30 days is really typical, but just be aware. And just a reminder, it's not legally binding. So the second hardest thing after timeline is going to be navigating multiple opportunities, right? So you're going to have, often the fellows run into this problem of, there's some places that will hire you, often private practice, and some hire really late, like large bureaucratic academic centers. And you will have often an offer letter at the same time where you haven't even got an interview from the place you really want to go. I would say try to be honest. It's a small, small world. Unfortunately, the world of neonatology gossips. So if you are not honest, that can come back to haunt you. But don't be overly blunt. Be polite. I would say potential employers should understand this dynamic. If they don't, that may actually be a little bit of a warning sign that it might not be a perfect place. But once you get the offer letter, the clock is ticking. And also just remember, there aren't any perfect jobs. There are many good jobs out there, but like you're probably not going to get everything you want. Contracts, get a lawyer to review your contract is my general advice to all my fellows. The private contracts, you have a lot more negotiating room. They all often need the most help than a lawyer to kind of like sort through. The academic jobs, the contracts are often written in very tight, dense bullet point that is harder to negotiate. But the one thing to think about is, do you have a non-compete clause in there? And can you get it removed if you really need it removed? Be aware of the insurance that you're going to get, right? You have either claims made, occurrence made, or tails made. And do you need a tail? And very briefly, because I think I'm starting to run over time here, claims made is while the insurance running, like for the year 2022, if you buy that insurance, any claims made during 2022 will be insured. But if you don't buy it for 2023 and you get sued about a case in 2022, you're out of luck. And that's why you buy tail insurance. So you just need to know what insurance you're getting into. More often, that type of insurance is more with private practice groups. Occurrence made it's more expensive, but if the universe, and this is much more often for like academic centers, it covers you for any legal actions that come in the year 2022, whether or not the case is brought in 2022 or 2057. I would just say begin working on your state licensure and credentialing as early as you can. It is unbelievably complicated at some places, and some state licenses are extremely difficult they're not difficult, it's just you have 1.5 million hoops to jump. Very common questions in 30 seconds or less, like I really won't do these justice, but how do you navigate a job hunt with a partner? I've always had to navigate a job hunt with my partner. I think you just need to have open communication, know that maybe your first job will not be your job for the rest of your life. And it's going to be hard. I think there just isn't an easy answer to that one, except like really think about what you need or don't need. How much am I going to make? There's a really good paper by Russ Horowitz and Renata Savic, Neonatal Salary Factors, Equity and Gender, that I think is a must read for any fellow. It will give you some regional variance. And the thing to really know is that if you are a woman, you are very likely to be underpaid based on this paper. So I would please come to our negotiations for jobs in the fall, because I think it's really important that that disappears during my lifetime or sooner. Fit jobs and interviews. It's a hard question. Like, I think that I'm going to defer on these new two questions because I talked a little bit too long on timeline. And I will turn this over to Heather French.
Great, thanks, Patrick. And I'm sure we'll have time to answer, some of your questions. Just send them to the moderators. If we don't get a chance to answer all of your questions live, we will do our best to type out responses that Nicole and Bree will share with all of you, because I'm sure all of you have lots of questions that are going to be generalizable to the entire audience, but you may also have questions that feel very unique to your own personal situation. So we will do our very best to help. So I'm going to talk just about, the nuts and bolts of putting together a cover letter and your CV and how you should go out about marketing yourself. So Patrick, next slide, please. So, you guys are all incredibly well trained. You have tons of experience with acute and chronic illness. You're in the midst of working through scholarly work. You have, over the course of your fellowship, developed great skills in didactic and bedside teaching. And all of you, the nice thing about neonatology in terms of this profession, there are so many jobs. Now, there might not be, a job in the exact city that you are hoping for, but again, as Patrick said, your first job doesn't need to be your last job. And so you may bounce around a little bit until you find exactly what you're looking for, but I guarantee you will find the right position for you. So just stay hopeful. And as Patrick said, the first thing that you need to do before you start your job search is find your focus and figure out what your goals are and how you are going to prioritize those goals. And really, the question you need to be asking yourself right at this very moment in time is what you want to be doing in 5 years. And in terms of, does that, when you think about that question, where do you want to be geographically? What family do you need to be near? Do you have commitments? Do you have a partner who also has constraints on where they can be? What types of clinical opportunities are you interested in? Do you want to be in a level 3 center that has opportunities to be in a level 4? Do you want to only be at a level 4? Do you want to be at a level 2? What are your clinical preferences in terms of how the patients you care for, but also how you work? Do you want to do 2-week clinical blocks? Do you want to do 3-week clinical blocks? Do you want to do 7 24s a month? There are so many different ways that practices are set up and so many different ways that you can schedule your clinical time as a neonatologist. It's one of the most flexible careers as a pediatric subspecialty because there are so many ways that you can be a neonatologist. And then, the next question to ask yourself is, ultimately, I promise you all, clinical work will become a little bit rote. And, I think that this is where having, some other clinical interests or research interests really will help you have longevity in your career, because there's only so many babies with RDS you can care for before it starts to feel stale. And so having opportunities to participate in QI or other types of research, even if you're in private practice, there's still QI that's required. What opportunities exist for you in that setting? Next, Patrick. So again, you really should contemplate your strengths and think about what you can bring to your future employer and write all of that down. What are you really good at? And, if you are unsure about what you are really good at, talk to your clinical mentor, talk to your research mentor, talk to your program director, talk to your division chief. Ask them how they would describe your strengths and let them really boost your confidence, because I think one of the biggest challenges as you guys embark on this job search is probably you always wonder, like, what would someone want from me? Like, I'm a fellow, like I don't have a lot of marketable skills yet, but you really do. You have so many marketable skills. And so talk to the people who care about you, talk to the people who have nurtured you, talk to the people who are working hard to make you your best neonatology self, and let them boost your confidence and use that information that you gather to help you find your focus. Okay, next slide. So there are a bunch of resources that are available to you that you should get your hands on. So Patrick had mentioned the paper by Eric Horowitz and Renata Savage, but the other place that you should be looking to get ideas about salary is at the AAMC. So every year the AAMC publishes a faculty salary report. It's very expensive if you try to get it on your own, but it should be available to you through your institution. And what you will find in the salary reports is a bunch of tables, and the tables will basically give you the median salary for an assistant, associate, and full professor in both private and in federal and state universities. Now, this is just for people that are staying in academics. If you are looking to go into private practice, then the paper that that Patrick shared, the Eric Horowitz paper, is going to be the paper for you to get better salary information. And if you look in the AAMC faculty salary report, you will note how different salaries vary depending on what part of the country you want to go to. If you want to make a lot of money as a neonatologist, go to the Southeast, because that is where they really need more neonatologists. If you want to, if you need to stay in the Northeast, where there are so many of us, your salaries are going to be a little bit lower. And so again, if salary is going to drive, it's one of your highest priorities. And I know a lot of you are finishing up school with a lot of debt burden. Really look at what the salary lines are like, and that can help you as you, kind of narrow down your job search focus. Next slide. This other website, I haven't spent a lot of time on it. It's called Neonatology Solutions. And this has a directory of every single NICU in the country. So levels 2, 3, and 4 throughout the US. And it'll describe each of those NICUs, how many beds, what the practice type is, if they have any open jobs, and other information about the community in which the NICU is situated. So it's as up to date as I think there is one available. So that might be a nice place to start, especially if you tell me you have to move to Montana or Wyoming. Like, I'm not sure what NICUs exist there. So this is a really good place to start. Next slide. And in this same website, they do have a job directory. And so, again, it's another place to look. As I had put in the chat, academic neonatology is very well connected. And usually through word of mouth, we're aware of what academic positions are available. But if you're looking into private practice, there is less, I'm less aware of the job opportunities within private practice. And so these types of job postings are going to be your best place to start. Sometimes you can work with a recruiter, but they are really the best place to start. Next slide. Another source for looking for jobs is Neonatology on the Web. I think it's actually the web address is neonatologyontheweb.org. And they also have job listings, and it seems, they have people who want jobs. So if you want a job in a very narrow geographic region, you could post there, as well as jobs that are available in different areas. Next slide. And then on the ONTPD collaboration page, when academic jobs are available, they do get sent to the ONTPD Executive Council and posted here. So while it certainly isn't the most comprehensive job postings, there are some jobs that are listed here, so you can ask your program director to check the collaboration page for you. Next slide. So if we haven't mentioned it ad nauseum already, your resources, talk to your clinical and research mentors, talk to your program directors, your division chief, and network. Probably some of you know each other at different institutions. You've met at boot camp, you've met at meetings. Find out what people in different parts of, different regions of the country know. You guys can really help one another if you keep your lines of communication open. Next slide. And I found this paper, this is a pretty old paper. It's a decade old. It was written by Dimitri Duchovny, who's the program director in Oregon, and Judy Ashner, who now is a department chair. And I thought this paper was great because it's, even though it's a decade old, it really focuses on all of the different things you should consider when applying for a job besides salary. So I would encourage all of you to get your hands on this paper and read it. And there's just a lot of very good practical advice and considerations that you should make. So this is a definite high yield, get this paper. Next slide. Okay, so you have talked to your mentors, you have identified programs you're interested in. So now the next step is you have to be your own cheerleader. No one is going to be a cheerleader for you. As best as you can be one for yourself. You know, I will reach out on the behalf of my fellows, my division chief will do that for our fellows, but no one is going to promote you as well as you can promote yourself. So you really need to get comfortable with this type of position. This idea of self-promotion can be really hard, but we all have to embrace it and go for it. Next slide. So your CV, you need to start right now. If the majority of you here are finishing up the end of your second year, you've got to have your CV like on paper and you need to be revising it now. It's almost June. And so, you know, your goal with your CV is to demonstrate through all of the training that you've had and the accomplishments that you've had, that you are qualified for the position that you seek. And you really need to be able to show your productivity and what you've been up to for the last couple of years in residency and fellowship. Hopefully your CV can demonstrate opportunities where you've had to grow your leadership and administrative skills, and you need to be able to show your initiative in your CV. Your CV really needs to tell a story. So if the CV lands on my desk and says that, you know, and the cover letter says, I want to be, you know, a QI person for your division. If I look through your CV and I don't see any QI work or, you know, actions towards building skills in QI, then like, what am I going to do with that? So you need your CV to tell a story that shows how you have, you know, developed a focus, particularly if you're heading into academic jobs. Now, if you are headed into private practice, then you need to make sure that you demonstrate administrative, teamwork, and leadership skills. Those are going to be the most highly valued in private practice. So again, your CV needs to tell a story based on the type of job you're looking for. Next slide. So who will look at your CV? This is important because you don't want to have any personal information on your CV if it's going to be distributed widely. So like, don't put your social security number on it, your license and DEA numbers, that's like not required. People that will see it is anyone who interviews you, divisional and department leadership, the credentialing department, potentially the credentialing department at a medical college. And your CV really will be read for content. And it's, you know, much more important that the content is great than the formatting and the flowery font. Like make it so that it's easy to read and that you have substance over style. Having two versions of your CV can also be really valuable if you are applying for both academic and non-academic jobs. So in academic CV, you really want to highlight your accomplishments. And if you're heading into private practice, you know, certainly you're going to want to highlight your administrative, clinical skills and your ability to be a good team member and a good citizen in your division. Next slide. Next slide. Thanks. So you have to use perfect spelling. Back up one, Patrick, please. You have to use perfect spelling and grammar and use a clear font. Don't get into like all the crazy fonts. Just stick with Arial or Times New Roman. 11-point font or bigger. Remember that some of us middle-aged people, our eyesight is going, so don't make it hard for us to read. Use white paper, use normal margins. And again, it's about making it very easy to read. So don't put things into paragraphs. Use bullet points. Use bold font and spacing to draw attention to things that you want us to look at, and do not use extraneous words. Less is more in this situation. Next slide. So, you know, again, don't highlight your shortcomings. You know, so you might see, if you see a CV template, it might have a section where you're supposed to list your awards. If you don't have any, don't write that. Don't put awards, none. Just delete that section from your CV. Again, do not highlight your shortcomings. Avoid listing the same accomplishment twice. So if, for instance, if you have, you know, or you are invited to give a talk that was a local talk, you know, you were invited by your division to give a talk. You can't list that twice, you know, it can only be listed once. The only exception might be where you had an abstract that you presented as a poster at one meeting, and then you also were able to present that as a platform at a different meeting. So just be really careful that you're not double dipping. Next slide. Some people will put in a statement of academic or personal interests on their CV. It's not required. You might choose to do so. You want to, again, make sure that you ask your faculty to review your CV for accuracy, for impact, and comprehensive content. I tell my fellows that they must send me their CVs so that I have an opportunity to look through them and make sure that they are demonstrating who they want, a division chief to see. And so someone really should be reading your CV. And the other thing that is essential is you have to be honest on your CV, because you could lose your position if your CV is not correct. Next slide. And even if it's an honest mistake. Next slide, Patrick, sorry, I had some. So this guy was the CEO at Radio Shack. And he admitted to exaggerating his academic credentials on his resume, and his tenure as CEO lasted only 9 months. So literally you can have your contract revoked if you are not honest on your CV. So I can't imagine that will be any of you, but just, keep that in mind. Next slide. So, resources. So a lot of people will wonder, well, I don't even know how to format a CV. So TECaN, on the TECaN website, there are sample CVs and cover letters. Please take a look. Your institution may actually have an institutional CV template that they want you to use. So again, just ask your program director if something like that exists within your institution. But again, feel free to use the TECaN resources. Next slide. So the cover letter will be sent with your CV, and you need to send it when you're contacting your, the program you're interested in. This says by letter or email. No one uses snail mail anymore. Just send it electronically. And your cover letter typically is going to be 4 paragraphs in length. Next slide. So how should it look? So your first paragraph should say, who are you? Why, I'm a 3rd year NICU fellow. I'm going to use CHOP because that's where I'm from. I'm a 3rd year NICU fellow at CHOP. I am really interested in your program. My program director, Heather French, suggested I reach out to you. I'm very interested in your mix of, level 3 and level 4 patient populations, particularly your small baby unit. I am interested in a clinical position that allows me to pursue my interest in QI. Next paragraph. So then you want to give some information about your exceptional training. I had the wonderful opportunity to train at CHOP, where I was exposed to, a breadth of, patients in both a level 3 and a level 4 setting. I have been trained in the care of ECMO patients. I can, the care, I'm comfortable with many different types of ventilators, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Next paragraph would be, I am interested in your, division because, you'll have to scroll through these, Patrick, for me. Because I have academic and clinical interests that your program excels in. I have unique qualities that I can bring to your program. Your small baby unit fits with all of the training that I've had in, I've done a QI project in the golden hour. I have done an early extubation project. And I really feel like I could bring, additional perspectives and experience to your small baby program. It is okay to say, and I'm also equally interested in your NICU because I do have family in the area and I've been hoping to return home to the mountains of Colorado. But it's important that you're not stating that the only reason you want to go to this program is because of geography. There has to be something else. Your last paragraph would be, in summary, I really am interested in your program because of its national reputation in the care of small babies. I think I would bring, experience and breadth to your program, given my training in XYZ. Please contact, my program director, my division chief, my clinical mentor would be happy to provide you with a reference. I look forward to hearing from you very soon. So that would be that's what you want your cover letter to look like. Have your program director or your mentor read your cover letter and make sure that it is specific. Okay, it has to be specific. Do not have a formulaic cover letter for each program. Each program is different. And, if I were receiving a CV and cover letter from a candidate, I would want to know that that candidate has spent a lot of time being thoughtful about why our program would be a good match for you. Again, we've talked about this before. How do you approach a program? Have your faculty, your mentors introduce you, use a recruiter if you're heading into private practice, or, reach out because of something that's posted on a job board. For those of you that are, not heading into the job search right now, start networking. Approach people at meetings, even virtual meetings, but just build your network. Next slide. Again, you have to self-promote. Use the people that live within your network. As Patrick said, follow up if you don't get an initial response to your inquiry. And if it's a great program that doesn't currently have a job opening, just ask if they'll keep your CV on file in case there's a future opportunity. Okay, so I'll end there. Again, we will work hard to answer your questions either through, at the end of the Q&A or in the chat or at the follow-up.
Excellent, thank you. So as a reminder, if you have to hop off early, no worries. At the bottom right hand of the screen is the QR code for the post evaluation survey. Based on the data and the feedback that we've received over the past few years while we've been implementing this job search series, there are a lot of frustrations about the lack of transparency and structure of the job search, and all of the anxieties and emotions that y'all are feeling are completely normal, and everyone's feeling them no matter if they tell you that they are not. Data on the specifics of individual fellows or transitioning neo job search is not out there, and a lot of it is from kind of, or at least traditionally, word of mouth from co-fellows or junior faculty, or talking with your program leadership. And one of the goals of this job search series committee and the webinar series is to hopefully change this and make it seem less daunting and alleviate some of the frustrations. Next slide. So I am going to share a little bit of data from you guys to you that we collected last year. So we sent an end of the job search survey last year in order to help alleviate some of these frustrations and increase the transparency. And so we send it out around March. We'll be doing the same thing this year. And I can't express enough the importance of this so that we can make it more representative each year as more and more fellows utilize the job search series. So about 63% of those who registered for the job search series last year completed the final job search survey, and 60% of these individuals underwent a job search. Of these individuals, about 75 provided details about their individual job search experiences. About 2/3 were looking for academic jobs, and about 1/3 were looking for private practice jobs. Next slide. So take this information with a grain of salt. Again, it was only 75 fellows who provided individual job search information, and all job searches are very individualistic, although they do have some commonalities. But my goal here is to hopefully just give you some general information to help kind of guide this unfamiliar process. So here is a chart of the resources utilized by survey respondents last year to identify jobs. As you can see, the grand majority used just kind of cold emailing or cold calling programs to determine whether or not a position was going to be available at their institution or at their practice. Job postings are hit or miss, more so for academics than private practice, but even private practice, there can be openings that are not posted. A lot of academic centers, their timeline is a little bit more delayed than private practice, and they may not know yet whether they'll have the funds or the availability of postings, or sorry, of positions, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't reach out. They'll keep you in mind and continue to follow up with those programs, especially if you're interested in them. Other resources were online job centers and mailing lists, some of which that we shared with you guys during this presentation and in the chat. Fellowship program leadership, social connections, and physician recruiters were highly utilized as well. Next slide. So survey respondent reported components of job search things that contributed to their stress. So high up there is limited job availability in preferred areas, mostly geographic areas. Different timelines is a huge stressor, especially if you are applying to both private practice and academics. Personal geographic constraints on the job search, competition with other applicants. A lot of our respondents shared with us that they were surprised that they were competing not only with brand new kind of fellows graduating, but also with transitioning neonatologists or more senior neonatologists hoping to kind of go or change institutions or change practices. So keeping that in mind. And then also the idea of minimal communication, especially early on, especially for academic centers that may not know yet if they have positions available. Next slide. So specifics to job applications. So you can see here that of the cohort from last year, about 29% applied to 4 to 6 places, about 27% applied to 7 to 9 places. Individuals applying into academics typically applied to more locations. About half of private practice respondents applied to 4 to 6, and about 67% of those applying into academics applied to greater than 7 locations. Next slide. The majority of interviews received, you can see here the number of interview invitations that were received for the cohort. So about a quarter of our cohort received about 3 interview invitations. The majority, so I would say over 2/3 of these had initial telephone screens before being brought or virtually interviewed. And half reported that their initial interview outside that telephone screen was virtual only. Next slide. As far as job offers, the majority of people received 1 to 3 offers. Very few received more than that. And about 48% of our cohort stated that they were only given about 1 to 2 weeks to make a decision on an offer once received. Now, some did state that as long as you're transparent and continue to keep lines of communication open, letting them know that you need extra time to continue to discuss options with your family. A lot were able to receive extensions, but kind of right off the bat, about half received 1 to 2 weeks. Next slide. This is just to give you a general sense of when the fellows from last year signed their contracts kind of throughout the year. Again, like Patrick stated previously, this is very heterogeneous and dependent on many individual factors. About 75% of the cohort who went into academics did not utilize an attorney for contract negotiation, versus about only 57% of those who went into private practice. Next slide. And then here in this slide, you see that about half of our cohort spent 4 to 6 months searching for a job before receiving a offer. And so this is a kind of prolonged process that's kind of different from the previous stages that we've been a part of. And so to keep that in mind as you are starting to schedule these interviews and trying to juggle your continued fellow clinical work or your attending clinical work, that this is also another big area of stress for our NEOs looking into finding a job. Next slide. Lastly, this is a list of the top advice that was submitted by our cohort last year who underwent the job search. This list is listed in order of importance, with the grand majority of people stating to start early. And what that means is with your CV, with your cover letter, start self-reflecting on what is important to you, what you want to look for. Be persistent. Do not be afraid to follow up multiple times or to cold call or cold email follow up. Again, the importance of using your social connections, but being cautious that they can make or break your job search. Identifying what is most important to you prior to interviewing and applying widely and outside of your institution, even if you want to stay. Perfect. And so I will end my portion of the talk here, and we will, next slide, transition to the Q&A. I will actually have you, Patrick, transition to the next slide just so that you have, for those of you who need to hop off right at 2, have the QR code for our post session evaluation survey and a list of our upcoming sessions. Again, as a reminder, once our recorded link is available, I will send it out to everyone who registered for this session. And for those of you who complete our post-evaluation survey, we'll send out any resources, including the chat text from this session out to you guys. So let's transition to a QA. We'll try to stay on for as long as our panelists are available to stay here. The first question goes to both of our panelists, and it's about the actual interview and what are some important things to consider asking and what are questions to be prepared for.
Nicole, I think we actually answered that in the chat while you were talking.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Perfect. I have not been following up with the chat. Thanks so much.
We do have a question that was submitted that I will read off. So for your CV, what stage of training should you begin? Should medical school awards, training, and experiences be included, or is it time to get rid of that and just list where you went to medical school?
I will say that if it's, I think anything from medical school on is fine because it's part of your, your training. And right now, the only thing that you have to show for yourself is your 10 years of training, which is significant. And so, anything that's in med school and on is fine, but make it that it's relevant to the job that you're searching for. Like, I don't need to know that you were the, second year medical school, you worked in the student health clinic, that kind of stuff is not relevant. But if you did some research that, somehow has helped build your skill set, that's important. If you had some leadership opportunities, that's important. If you've had some awards, keep it there. Nothing from college though, unless it really was something that helped you build your career. Again, you're trying to tell a story that sort of starts broadly in med school. And then as you become a fellow, it's narrowed to where you can say, I'm an expert in X, Y, or Z, particularly for academics. Again, private practice, you can have a CV that is a little bit more broad, but if you're going into academics, you want it to be a little bit more narrowed.
Yeah, I would totally agree with Heather on this one. And maybe one way to think about this is you're telling a story about who they're going to hire. And so if there's stuff in your in college that accentuates or is important to that story, please put it in there. Like I was a statistics major who did a bunch of projects that focused on QI, which sparked my interest in QI. And now I have, I hope to do QI masters. Like that's a great story to tell because it tells about additional skills that you bring to the table. But if but be judicious about that as well. Like if it accentuates your story, put it in there. If it doesn't, dump it.
I do think there's oftentimes a concern on the parts of fellows that your CV needs to be really long. You see the CVs of your mentors and they're like pages and pages and pages. That is not expected from a fellow finishing training. Like you don't need to pad it to make it look long. We can see through that right away. So just, the things that are relevant, have them in there. If it's not relevant, get rid of it. Again, you want these things to be targeted. You want the division chief to look at it and be able with a glance to know who you are and what skills you're bringing to the table.
Yeah, cluttered is hard. Sorry, go ahead, Nicole.
Can y'all comment on whether letters of recommendation or reference are expected?
In my experience, I'm always asked for a letter of recommendation if the fellow has made it to the second round after they've completed the second round. So they need letters of recommendation if they're planning on hiring you. It's part of the credentialing process for the hospital, but they don't typically ask for those beforehand. Occasionally, I have had calls from division chiefs or practice managers just to, get another perspective on who you are and what skill sets you have. So sometimes I'll get those phone calls, but not often.
Yeah, likewise. I usually say, and there's some variety on this, but I usually tell my fellows to put in their cover letter, references available on request. Like I don't ask them to explicitly spell them out.
During your interview, should you ask clinical questions to determine whether a practice is right for you? Should you ask specific questions about ventilator models, BPD or PDA management, et cetera?
I would say that, I think if you're going to go back for a second interview, you should only go back for that second interview if there is a 50% chance that you might go to that institution if you were offered a job. So if those types of questions will help you determine whether or not you should take on a second interview, then ask them. It is very likely if you're leaving your home institution and going elsewhere, the way that babies are managed on ventilators or, their guidelines or protocols are going to be different from your home institution. And different is always good. It's always good to broaden your exposure and depth and understand there's 9 ways to skin a cat when very little evidence exists in neonatology in the big picture. And so you should ask the questions that you believe you need to ask to help you decide whether or not a second interview, if offered to you, would be something you would be interested in.
And I would just follow up with that is a little bit of that is knowing your audience. That may not be the question you ask the section chief, but it may be the question you ask the junior faculty member. And there's also ways to be subtle about this. The question is you don't say what's weird about your practice. You say hey, when you came here 2 years ago, what were the practice patterns that either surprised you or were kind of exciting to learn? A good question is what babies do you transfer out? I think so. A lot of our fellows come from really highly resourced level 4 NICUs, right? That never transfer anything or very rarely transfer anything. If you're moving to a smaller practice, private practice model, or even a smaller NICU or academic center, they may not have all the subspecialists. So I think a fair question is, who do you transfer out and why? Everybody transfers out. Sometimes it's because of family needs. So I think that those junior faculty, young people just joining the practice fairly newly should be able to give you the scope on that kind of stuff. And it's probably not the question, the interaction you want to have with the person actually hiring you.
Perfect. So we'll do more questions. Bree, you can start with yours.
Okay, one from the chat. So How should you navigate interviewing at your home institution? Any specific considerations to take since they already know you and you know them?
Patrick, do you want to start or?
Yeah, so it depends on how friendly your section head is the bottom line. I'm blessed that I have a really friendly pro fellow section head. And so I often, I've been talking to my section head about the fellows and where they're looking for jobs, probably for the last 2 years, somewhere in the end of first year. So he knows. And I often, if you have a friendly section head, I often recommend that interview happens really early. You're going to have nerves. You're going to be, you might as well get it over with the people who know you and are supportive of you, right? And so you have some sense of what's coming up in their future with the interviews that you don't know. So that's kind of my general take. If your section head's a little bit grumpier, it gets a little bit trickier, and I would find your best faculty mentor and or program director who advocates for you and have a heart-to-heart with them about the best way to approach this, because that's going to be so unique based on each of the programs.
Yeah, and I think I would add, if you're interviewing at your home institution, your interview day is not going to make or break whether or not they're going to offer you a job, because they've had, 2+ years of exposure to you. So if you just have an off day or a headache, or you're just not feeling, your best self on your interview day, it's fine. They really do know you already, and they know what skills you're bringing to the table. I think it's, I hate to say it like this, but, having you interview is sort of a formality, because I think most division chiefs already know whether they're going to be able to offer, a fellow who's interested a position, but they still need to be able to provide you with the opportunity to interview with different faculty and just, to really have a different type of candid conversation about what opportunities exist, what niche you could, fill within the division, what service expectations, call expectations you might have. So you can get a little bit more of the nitty-gritty questions on that first interview day that you might often reserve for the second interview day, because if you're interviewing at your home institution, it is unlikely that you'll have a second interview day, because that's sort of pointless. You've probably already given many research talks within the division and things like that. So it'll have a slightly different flavor, but again, a bad interview at your home institution will not make or break you.
Perfect. And we'll do one last question. Say you're interested in academics and teaching is one of your goals. Would you send your teaching portfolio along with your CV and cover letter, or should you build these experiences into your CV?
Well, this makes it sound like this is the person asking this question wants an academic job. I'm making that assumption. We all, if you work in an academic center, you have an expectation to teach. So saying that you want to be a teacher is probably not the best way to sell yourself. If you have unique skill sets that institution does not have, say for instance, you have taken a simulation facilitator course and you could be a simulation educator, or you have a unique skill set in respiratory physiology and you'd like to help rebuild, a respiratory physiology course, like then, it's good to highlight that type of portfolio. But again, if you work in academics, teaching is an expectation. And so it's not something that makes you unique or different. So if you're interested in medical education, you need to think about what your kind of unique slant will be, separate from teaching. Are you interested in assessment? Are you interested in curriculum design? Are you interested in mentoring? So you have to have something that's a little bit different than just teaching, because medical education is so much bigger than that.
Yeah, I would also agree. And I would say the slightly cynical take on this is that section chiefs are looking for unique skills that are often very research focused for outside hires. Very frequently, section chiefs, if they need, they will hire fellows they really like internally to fill those education spots, even if the research isn't quite hooks up with what their long-term vision for the section is. So med ed is often internally hired for a fellow that is well liked. it would be unusual unless you have like POCUS skills, really profound simulation skills, or some other unique niche to be hired on a just straight out med ed at a other institution. I don't know what your take on that is, Heather, but that's kind of where I'm at on it.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's a few of us that have been able to build our careers in the med ed world. But, you know, again, it's not like all of us who have been promoted on medical education, we're not being promoted on our teaching. We're being promoted on program development and other things. So if that's where you want to see yourself someday, you know, then that's what you need to put on your CV. Like, I've been involved in helping build XYZ program. I've been involved in, you know, rejiggering the curriculum for residents. You know, I built a new, you know, simulation curriculum. So that's what you really want to be highlighting in terms of like, if you were going to send your teaching portfolio.
Nicole, can I put you on the spot by seeing a budding medical educator? What's your take on this?
So just to clarify, when you're saying, Patrick, that it would be difficult to hire at a different institution on med ed, I'm thinking from like a research perspective. But if you are med ed focused, you could apply to an academic full-time clinical position and continue to work on your med ed niche as a junior faculty member, and eventually develop roles or significant research or sim or POCUS that could eventually protect some of your clinical time. But I think what Patrick, and correct me if I'm wrong, Patrick, what Patrick was saying is if you're looking for like a research med ed position, that is definitely more difficult from an academic setting.
I think just med ed is difficult overall because it's a much newer field, right? And there's some people who are really trailblazing the way that are both impressive and I think will help the rest of us in the long run. But, you know, if this is a know your audience thing, most section chiefs are, you know, in their late 50s, 60s and have bench Rs, right? And that's who they're looking for. Yeah.
Right. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Myers and Dr. French, for participating as panelists in our first session. Again, to those remaining on the call, we will send out the recorded link to all who registered. Please, please, please give us feedback via the post-evaluation survey. You can access it through the QR code you see there or the link placed in the in the chat. Any questions that were submitted that we did not get to today, we will have our panelists type up answers to and send that out to all who submit our post-evaluation survey. Thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us, guys.
Yeah, and stay positive. It's all going to work out well. Really, there is a job out there for every single one of you. It might not be the dream job, but it will be a great job, and it will be a job that will build your skill set. It will give you experience to help you leapfrog to that dream job if you don't get it right away. So, you know, remain positive. There is a lot. This is a great field to be in. There's so many different practice models, and so many NICUs, right? So there's always a job.
Thank you, Nicole and Bree, for moderating as well and helping build this program.
Yeah, definitely. You know, and if there's anyone out there in the audience, like I can stay for a few more minutes if people have questions they want to ask us. You guys are welcome to unmute. I don't know if we allow that in the settings.
I think I have it. This is one that's less heavily restricted. Some of our online with experts and other things are like, you can't do anything except unless you're a moderator, unfortunately. But yes, I'm happy to sit on and answer questions, or actually just email me. My email is all over the ONTPD website if you're looking for me. And I'm happy to either email or chat if it's particularly helpful to you.
If you do not feel comfortable unmuting and asking out loud, please feel free to continue using the chat and I can continue reading off those questions.
It's so interesting. We had a second year fellow. I mean, what is it? It's May. We had a second year fellow have a first round interview already. So funny how it, you know, just it's so different across the country.
Yeah, I had, in the last 3 years, I had somebody hired in June and I had somebody hired in July, right? Like literally within a week of the season started and literally a week within the end of this, and they're both get at really good spots and doing really well. Yeah, the visa talk actually was really good last year. And those people are often looking kind of at the start of, not the start, but the middle of first year, because that's just kind of the lead time they need. But Sai, I saw Sai here. I don't know if he's still here, but Sai does such a nice job with that as well.
Are we doing that again?
We are.
We are on June 28th.
Great.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to hop off here, but
Right.
thank you, everybody. And Wednesday is way better than the suggestions we got in the first year. The first year was like, make it Fridays. So we made it Fridays and nobody came. Duh.
Tuesday was better.
Okay, take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
So good to see you.